Imagine trying to play um, a notoriously difficult video game, but instead of focusing on your own screen, you are desperately mashing the buttons on player two's controller.
Right, just frantically hitting the wrong buttons.
Exactly. Your character is standing there completely still, taking damage, while you are sweating and panicking.
And you're trying to force player two to dodge and jump exactly the way you think they should.
Yeah, it is exhausting, and it's entirely ineffective. Worst of all, you are guaranteed to lose your own game because your hands are on the wrong controller.
It's the ultimate paradox of human behavior, really. We have this deeply ingrained illusion that gripping the steering wheel tighter will somehow make the ride smoother.
Even when we aren't the ones driving the car.
Exactly. We just hemorrhage our own energy trying to manage the uncontrollable.
And that is exactly what we are tackling in today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of excerpts, some fascinating psychological research, and highly visual cultural evidence from Mel Robbins' book.
The let them theory.
Yes, the let them theory, a life-changing tool that millions of people can't stop talking about. The mission today is to unpack a psychological framework that has gone so overwhelmingly viral, it has literally prompted thousands of people to permanently tattoo the concept onto their bodies.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. And if you are listening to this right now, whether you are commuting or maybe prepping for a high-stakes meeting or just trying to navigate a genuinely exhausting family dynamic, we know your time is precious.
Absolutely. You want the deep insight without the overwhelm.
Right. So we're going to break down how learning to take your hands off player two's controller will fundamentally shift your neurobiology, your stress levels, and your success.
To really grasp the mechanics of how transformative this tool is, though, we have to establish the baseline. We have to look at the immense cognitive load that led to the creation of this theory in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into the exact machinery of the theory, we need to talk about the sheer paralysis of trying to manage other people's behavior. The text outlines a really dark period for Robbins.
It does. According to the source material, at age 41, she was unemployed and staring down $800,000 in debt.
Oh, wow. Wait, 800,000?
Yeah, almost $1 million in debt. And watching her husband's restaurant business completely collapse. The anxiety was so immense that her nervous system basically shut down.
Which makes total sense.
Right.
Yeah.
She resorted to avoidance behaviors, hitting the snooze button till the last possible second, drinking to numb the psychological pain, procrastinating on every major decision.
It sounds like a textbook freeze response. I mean, when the brain's threat detection system is completely overloaded by perceived danger, it just pulls the plug on executive function.
That is the exact mechanism at play. And in that state of neurological paralysis, she developed a tool that completely changed her trajectory.
Rocket launch thing, right?
Yes. She remembered watching a television broadcast of a NASA rocket launch and seeing the final countdown. So one morning, lying in bed just paralyzed by dread, she counted backward. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And she physically launched herself out of bed.
Exactly, before her brain's defense mechanisms could talk her out of it. She dubbed it the 5-second rule and spent the next decade teaching it to millions of people. It was a massive success for bypassing internal hesitation.
But the source material highlights a massive limitation to that tool.
Yeah.
Because the 5-second rule is entirely about self-regulation.
Right, it gets you out of bed, it forces you to send the scary email.
Or gets you to the gym. But a decade later, Robbins had this profound realization that her underlying baseline of stress hadn't actually disappeared, because the true roadblock to her happiness wasn't just her own internal hesitation.
No, the roadblock was other people. Or, more accurately, the cognitive load she was carrying by allowing other people's actions to dictate her internal state.
Oh, that is so common.
It is. We suffer from this cognitive bias known as the illusion of control. We waste massive, almost incalculable amounts of mental bandwidth trying to, curate our personalities so a boss respects us.
Or bending our life choices into pretzels so our family won't judge us.
Exactly. Or actively trying to fix a partner who has zero desire to change. We operate under the delusion that if we just perform the right sequence of actions, we can control the internal monologues of the people around us.
Which brings us to the actual tool. The two words that act as the antidote to that specific brand of exhaustion: let them.
Let them. The text provides these highly relatable, low-stakes, everyday examples to demonstrate how Robbins started applying this to immediately lower her cortisol levels.
Like what?
Well, if the local bakery is entirely out of bagels on a Sunday morning, let them be out of bagels.
Right. Don't throw a fit.
Exactly. If the neighbor's dog is barking relentlessly, let the dog bark. If grandma insists on reading depressing political news out loud to the whole room during dinner, let her read it.
And there was one about friends, too, right?
Yeah, if your close friends decide to go on a weekend trip and deliberately don't invite you, let them go on the trip.
The cultural response to this concept was just astronomical. I mean, the stats in this text are staggering. Robbins posted a 60-second video explaining this baseline concept.
And it just blew up.
Completely. Within 24 hours, it hit 15 million views. Within a week, 60 million views. People were flooding her inbox. Apple named a podcast she did about it the 6th most shared in the entire world that year.
That is massive reach.
It is, but the visual evidence in our source packet is what really gets me. It is a literal collage of human skin. Wrists, forearms, collarbones, ankles covered in permanent ink reading. Let them.
Wow.
Yeah, delicate script fonts, bold block letters, little hearts. People are permanently modifying their physical bodies to remember a 2-word psychological framework.
You know, when a concept resonates deeply enough to bypass the rational brain and become a permanent physical tattoo on thousands of strangers, it is striking a very raw, very universal nerve.
For sure.
It's tapping into a profound, hardwired exhaustion we all share from fighting human nature.
I have to admit, though, when I first read through those examples, a significant part of me was highly skeptical.
Really? How come?
Well, I kept wondering if this is just the concept of letting it go, repackaged with a catchy, social media-friendly wrapper. Because from my own experience, simply letting things go usually means you're just suppressing your emotions.
Ah, right.
To paste on a smile, you tell everyone you're fine, but physiologically, your heart rate is still elevated, and you're secretly seething inside.
What's fascinating here is how the text explicitly differentiates between emotional suppression and this theory. Robbins points out that letting it go often feels totally unresolved because it's a passive action.
Okay, that makes sense.
It feels like you are walking away from a fire while still complaining about the heat. But the let them theory is actively rooted in ancient philosophical and psychological frameworks. It draws heavily on Stoicism, Buddhism, and detachment theory.
So it's fundamentally different from just ignoring a problem.
Completely different. In Stoicism, the absolute core tenet is focusing your cognitive energy strictly on your own thoughts and actions, recognizing you have zero dominion over external forces.
And Buddhism has a similar angle.
Yeah, Buddhism teaches that human suffering is generated by resisting reality, by aggressively wishing things were different than they currently are. Let them is the modern application of radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance. I like that.
When you say let them, you aren't suppressing anger. You are cognitively acknowledging that you never possess the control you thought you did. You are purposefully creating a mental gap between an external situation and your internal emotional response.
So it actually calms your nervous system down.
Exactly. It biologically stops your amygdala from triggering a fight or flight response because you're no longer categorizing the other person's behavior as a threat to your survival.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit dangerous if you aren't paying close attention. The book outlines a massive trapdoor hidden inside this theory.
Oh, the isolation trap.
Yes. Let's go back to that scenario with the friends planning a weekend trip without you. If I just sit alone on my couch, scrolling through their vacation photos on my phone, and I just repeatedly mutter, let them, aren't I just transforming into a lonely doormat?
It's a valid question.
It feels like you could easily curdle into sitting in a tower of moral superiority, telling yourself, look at me, I'm so evolved, I don't even care that they left me out.
The text actually validates that exact trap.
Yeah.
If you only implement let them, you will absolutely end up isolated, bitter, and wondering why the theory is making your life worse.
Because you aren't actually doing anything.
Exactly, because let them initially gives you a very seductive, quick hit of superiority. You get to wash your hands of the situation, blame the other person, and feel elevated above the drama. But it leaves you entirely passive in your own life.
So what's the fix?
The crucial, non-negotiable second half of the equation that prevents that isolation is let me.
Let them plus let me. But how does let me actually function without just being passive-aggressive?
The text uses a brilliant visual of a seesaw on a playground to map out this power dynamic. On one side of the seesaw, you have let them.
Okay, so that's the acceptance side.
Right. That side represents acceptance, understanding, and relinquishing the desperate need to control the other people on the board. It releases your own hurt. But the fulcrum, the center point that gives you balance and true agency over your own life is let me.
I'm struggling to see how that plays out in real time.
Yeah.
If they are on one side and I am on the other, how does the fulcrum actually change the dynamic of the friend group who ditched me?
It changes your locus of control. Let them go on the trip without you? That releases the initial sting of rejection because you stop demanding they behave differently. But then the fulcrum shifts.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
Let me take responsibility for my own weekend. Let me reach out to a different circle of friends. Let me book my own dinner reservations.
Oh, I love that.
Or if this is a recurring pattern of exclusion, let me honestly reevaluate if these are the kind of friendships I want to prioritize moving forward. Let me is the ultimate power move because it relies entirely on your own radical self-awareness. It shifts you from being a victim of someone else's choices to the architect of your own response.
That reframing is incredibly potent. It takes all that wasted energy you were pouring into player two's controller and finally routes it back into your own character.
Exactly.
And the text applies this complete let them plus let me framework to two of the most universally exhausting relational hurdles we face: navigating other people's judgments and surviving other people's emotional tantrums.
This section on judgment relies on a staggering piece of cognitive science that really puts our anxieties into perspective. The average human being experiences approximately 70,000 thoughts a day.
Wait, 70,000? Distinct thoughts in a single day?
Yes, 70,000, and the vast majority of them are entirely random, fleeting, and contradictory.
That is a lot of noise.
As the book points out, you can barely control half the bizarre thoughts that pop into your own mind while you're driving down the highway. So the idea that you can carefully micromanage what pops into someone else's mind, what they think about your new haircut, your decision to change careers, or your divorce, is neurologically impossible.
I hear the logic in that.
Yeah.
It is easy enough to say, well, let the stranger in the grocery store think what they want about my sweatpants.
Right. Who cares about the stranger?
But when that judgment comes from someone whose opinion fundamentally shapes your world, like a parent, that intellectual logic usually falls apart. I mean, when your mother actively hates the person you decided to marry, that gets straight to the bone.
The text doesn't shy away from that deeper pain. It introduces a concept called the frame of reference to diffuse it. Robbins shares a very raw, personal example.
Her own mother, right.
Yeah. When she got married, her mother was deeply upset that she married a man from the East Coast, primarily because it meant Robbins was moving far away from her hometown.
So it wasn't even about the guy, really.
Right. But for a long time, Robbins internalized that as unsupportive, toxic judgment. But years later, Robbins had an epiphany. If her own daughters decided to marry someone and move to Paris or Los Angeles, she would be absolutely devastated too.
Because her daughters are her entire world, and the distance represents a massive loss.
Exactly. She stepped out of her own defensiveness and into her mother's frame of reference. Her mom wasn't maliciously wrong to feel grief about losing daily proximity to her child. And Robbins wasn't wrong to marry the man she loved and start a new life.
So they can both be right.
Let them creates the psychological space for two opposing truths to exist simultaneously. It removes the need for a zero-sum power struggle. Let her have her negative opinion and her grief. Let me live my life and build my marriage. You do not have to secure their absolute agreement to maintain a loving connection.
Two opposing truths existing without destroying the foundation of the relationship. That is a massive relief. But what happens when that internal judgment manifests as external, toxic behavior?
That's where things get tricky.
Yeah, because the text outlines a highly specific mental hack for dealing with an adult who resorts to giving you the silent treatment, or just completely loses their temper in a shouting match.
This might be the most practical neurohack in the entire book. When a grown adult is pulling the silent treatment, storming out of a room, or aggressively playing the victim, your first internal step is let them.
So just don't engage.
Do not chase them. Do not try to manage or soothe their emotions. Instead, you visualize an 8-year-old child trapped inside their adult body.
Wait, you literally picture them as a grade schooler throwing a tantrum in the middle of the kitchen.
Yes, and it isn't just a cute trick. It actively alters your neurological response.
How so?
Well, when someone is yelling at you, your brain interprets them as a threat. But when you visualize an 8-year-old in oversized adult clothes, your brain shifts gears. You stop feeling fear or intimidation.
Oh, I see. Because they aren't scary anymore.
Exactly. The threat response diminishes and you suddenly feel a sense of pity. You replace contempt with observational compassion. You let their emotional wave crash and recede on its own. And that is when the let me kicks in.
Let me not react to the bait.
That is the hardest part. Let me not immediately reach for my phone to send a defensive text paragraph. Let me not go to the fridge to eat my feelings. Let me not pour a heavy drink to chemically soothe my anxiety over their outburst.
You just have to sit with it.
You just observe the feelings rising within yourself. You recognize that what goes up must eventually come down, and you protect your own peace.
Mastering that with an adult throwing a tantrum is incredibly difficult, but it almost feels like child's play compared to how the source material scales this theory up.
Oh, for sure. The societal stuff.
Right. The text moves from regulating our internal emotional world to how we attempt to force change in the broader external world, from our societal structures all the way down to our closest adult friendships. And it touches on an arena that causes immense chronic stress for a massive portion of the population.
Politics. It's a huge source of anxiety.
Now, I want to be incredibly clear for you listening right now. We are strictly looking at how the book applies this psychological framework to the stress of civic life. We are absolutely not taking a side left or right. We are just reporting the text methodology impartially.
Absolutely.
The book states that when an election happens or a major court makes a ruling or a local school board votes on a contentious issue, you cannot alter what just occurred.
You can't change the past.
No. And if you try to mentally control or undo the past, you will drown in a sea of cortisol and stress. So the first necessary step is let them. The decision was made, the votes were tallied. But, and this is the vital trapdoor again, that does not mean you surrender your agency over the future.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where Let Me transforms from personal boundaries into civic action. Let them have made that ruling yesterday, but let me stay highly engaged on the issues I care about today.
That's a huge shift.
Let me volunteer my time, or organize my community, or cast my vote to actively influence the future. You don't sit on the couch in a state of passive doom scrolling, waiting for someone else to clean up the mess. You channel that localized frustration into actionable influence.
It's the deliberate shift from passive anxiety to active influence. And that word, influence, brings us to the behavioral science of pressure, which the book applies to anyone in our personal lives we are desperately trying to change.
Right, the personal interventions.
A partner who won't stop vaping, a friend who complains endlessly about a toxic job but refuses to quit, a sibling making disastrous financial choices. Trying to pressure a grown adult into changing their behavior is like trying to push an angry cat into a bathtub full of water.
Oh, what an image.
I mean, the harder you push their body, the more the claws come out, the more water splashes everywhere, and eventually everyone ends up bleeding and miserable. You cannot force them. You have to somehow create an environment where they want to get in the water.
Haha. Chaotic, but completely accurate. And the behavioral science actually backs up your cat analogy perfectly. The text explains this through a concept called psychological reactance.
Psychological reactance, what is that exactly?
The human brain has a hardwired survival instinct to fiercely guard its own autonomy. When you pressure someone, even if you are entirely correct and think you are saving their life, their brain doesn't process it as help.
Wait, really? Even if you're right?
Even if you are 100% right, neurologically, you are triggering a threat response in their amygdala. The logical part of their brain literally shuts down. You aren't fixing them. You are actively driving a wedge between you and the person you love. Adults only change when they internally decide to change.
I understand the science of reactance, but I am really hung up on the reality of it. Because watching someone you love actively fail or destroy their health feels like you are failing them. Does the text actually expect us to just stand by and watch them hit a brick wall?
It suggests allowing them to face the natural consequences of their actions, which is arguably the most painful form of love.
That sounds brutal.
It is. Often we compulsively rescue the people we care about. We give them money, we make elaborate excuses for their absence, we clean up the messes they leave behind.
Because we want to help.
But the text points out a harsh truth. When you constantly enable someone to avoid the fallout of their choices, you aren't fostering their independence. You are actively hindering their rock bottom. You prolong their suffering. Let them fail. Let them feel the profound discomfort of their own choices.
That requires an ironclad level of emotional boundaries.
It does. And once you do that, Let me is how you model positive behavior. Let me show up with deep compassion and ask curious, open-ended questions rather than delivering a rehearsed lecture. You utilize positive influence and proximity, not brute force pressure.
And this ruthlessly honest approach fundamentally changes who we choose to keep in our inner circle, too. The text has a very stark, unflinching take on adult friendships and the modern dating landscape.
Oh, the mixed signals section.
Yes. Let them show you who they truly are. If someone is constantly canceling plans at the last minute or sending you mixed signals about their commitment, the book says mixed signals aren't mixed at all. They're actually a remarkably clear message.
How?
If you are receiving mixed signals, you are not a priority. You are a convenience.
It is a bitter pill to swallow, but an absolutely necessary one for your own peace. If you are constantly performing mental gymnastics to make excuses for someone's poor behavior, you are living in a self-constructed fantasy.
Right.
When you say let them, you force yourself to observe the stark reality of the relationship data in front of you, and then let me grants you the power to set a standard.
To set a boundary.
Exactly. To say, I require a higher baseline of reciprocity in my friendships or romantic life, and I am willing to walk away from this table to find it. It transforms rejection into a simple process of elimination.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of psychological ground today. We've moved from the paralyzing, cortisol-soaked trap of trying to manage the 70,000 daily thoughts of every single person we encounter.
Which is impossible.
Totally impossible. We've looked at the liberating, ancient mechanisms behind radical acceptance and the words let them have, accepting the reality of a situation and allowing people to be exactly who they are, even if that means they fail, or they fundamentally misunderstand us, or they walk away entirely.
And we paired that with action.
Right. We balance that acceptance with the empowering, action-oriented fulcrum of let me taking total ownership of our responses, our civic actions, our boundaries, and our own healing. I want to remind you, the learner listening to this deep dive right now, your time and your mental bandwidth are your most precious finite resources.
They really are.
You do not need anyone's permission to be happy. You do not need to wait for everyone around you to act perfectly or agree with you before you can find a sense of peace. You only need your own permission. Take your hands off Player 2's controller and start mastering your own game.
This raises an important question, though, and it's something I want to leave everyone chewing on.
Oh, I love these. What is it?
We spent this entire deep dive talking about aiming the let them theory outward at our family, our friends, our coworkers, and the friction of society at large. But looking at the depth of this research, I can't help but wonder, what if the person you most desperately need to apply the let them theory to is past you?
Oh, wow. Past me.
Yeah. What if you need to look back at the version of yourself from 5 years ago, or even the version of you from 5 days ago, and finally say, let them?
Let them have made the mistakes.
Exactly. Let them have made those embarrassing mistakes. Let them have felt those crushing failures. Let them have accumulated that debt or stayed way too long in that wrong relationship. Stop expending your cognitive load trying to mentally control or rewrite a past you cannot alter.
That is so powerful.
Let past you be exactly who they were, so that present, you can finally release the shame, step fully into your let me era, and actually build the future.
Wow. Let past you completely off the hook. That is a profound place to leave it. Remember, you cannot control the internal machinery of human behavior, and the waters of our relationships will always be complex and unpredictable. But you and only you control how you swim through them. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep letting go of what isn't yours to hold, and we will catch you next time.